Hello and welcome to this short video introducing some of the key things to know about ancient China. First thing we're going to look at is why you'd want to study ancient China in the first place. We're going to look at a few key quotes from important figures in Chinese history. Emperor Taizong was the ruler of the Chinese in the Tang period. He said, "With history as a mirror, one can understand the rise and fall of a nation." Professor Zhang Guodong said, "Westerners value science and philosophy. The Middle East, South Asia, and North Africa gave birth to religions, yet Chinese people treasure the wisdom of history for self-cultivation, family management, and state governance." Xi Jinping, the Premier of China, said several thousand years ago, the Chinese nation trod a path that was different from other nations' cultures and development. We should be more respectful and mindful of 5,000 years of continuous Chinese culture. People should draw deeply from the past, taking what they find valuable and leaving what they don't, keeping fully in mind the experiences, lessons, and warnings of history. What do these people mean when they talk about Chinese history as being a mirror, or Chinese history being something we can draw upon to enrich our own understanding and life today? How do these ideas match with what you think about why people might study ancient China? One reason that's been proposed recently is that China is a growing power in our world and in our region. If you look at this graph, you'll see that historically China has been a major force, and that the period between the late 1800s and the 1970s, where China's power was reduced to make way for the rise of Europe and the United States, is actually a bit of a historical aberration. Because for most of history, and the bottom axis of this graph is not to scale, for most of history, China has been something like a third or a quarter of the world's economic power. And if China is rising again, maybe it's just returning to its rightful place in the world. We're going to talk now about a few key points of geography that you need to know for ancient China. Here it is. It's a large country. When we put some elevation on it, we can see it's bounded on its western side by the Himalayan mountains, along its north by a series of deserts, the Gobi and the steppe. It's bounded along its eastern side by a series of waterways, and it's bounded in the south by jungle along the border with Vietnam. So it's a very secure country. China is landscape and culture is dominated by a series of rivers. Looking from the east, you can see how China rises from this coastal plain up towards these mountains, and that these river valleys cut quite distinctive pathways that are suitable for agriculture and settled civilization through the hill country. So we can divide China's geography into three main areas. Along the east, you have this coastal region, which has a pleasant climate and good rainfall. You have the mountains, the Himalayas, and you have in the northwest, the deserts. The coastal region is the home of most of China's population. It's very It's a very densely populated area, and home to all the cities and famous places that you'd know. The Himalayan mountains in the west are very high and form a kind of natural barrier to the other great civilization of Asia, India. The Gobi Desert in China's northwest has been another one of these natural land barriers. As you can see, it's very dry and inhospitable. We're going to talk now about these river basins. The two rivers that you really should know are the Yellow River in the north, and then slightly to the south of it, the Yangtze. As you can see, China's population clusters around these river basins. And some people have even imagined that when you look at China's population, it's almost like an island in the middle of this mountainous and desert areas. So here's a picture of the Yellow River. You can probably guess where it gets its name from. It gets its distinctive yellow colour from a special sort of soil that blows into it from the steppe called loess, which then is carried by the river down to the coastal plain and eventually out into the sea. This means that there's constantly new soil accumulating in China, which makes it a great place for long-term agriculture. The Yangtze, very picturesque, very steep valleys. The problem with these rivers, though, is that eventually they will burst their banks and flood. China, every couple of years, gets massive downpours of rain, and keeping the rivers in their bounds and where you want them is a major issue for any Chinese ruler, today just as much as it was in ancient China. China isn't one of the only civilizations to grow up around a river. Most of the ancientest civilizations, the Indus Valley civilization, the Sumerians and Babylonians in Mesopotamia, and the Egyptians around the Nile, all used rivers as an important source of water, of fertile land, of you can use rivers as transport. You can use them eventually for power. There's many advantages to building a civilization around a river. We're going to talk now about the ways of life of people in ancient China. So we've got evidence that people were in China maybe 70,000 years ago. But they're living a way of life that's quite simple. They have a set of stone tools that they make out of the materials in their environment: spears, axes, scrapers, sharpeners, all that kind of stuff. And it's only about 6,000 years ago that they make this choice to change their way of life from hunting and gathering to some other options. So around this time, the climate all over the world is beginning to change. And so one option is for some people to continue to be hunter-gatherers, but they're probably going to have to move to new areas. Some people became herders, as in they moved with a herd of animals, goats or sheep or cattle, yaks, donkeys, whatever, not living in one place, but working across the grasslands, feeding their herds and then making their clothes from the skins of the animals and drinking their milk and eating their meat and so on. Some people decided to settle down and become farmers. So when we think about the peoples of China, those people who became herders tended to move to the edges of China, to the frontier regions. And they take up names like the Xiongnu, the Huns, the Turks, the Mongols, the Tibetans. China, or the Han Chinese, take up agriculture, and that means building ways of managing water. And one of the ways they do that is through construction projects like the Grand Canal. These agriculturalists also adopt a range of different crops depending on where they are in China. So in the south it tends to be rice, which requires terracing to make the most efficient use of the land, but also of the water and the soil to stop it just rolling away down the hills. In the north, where the climate is a bit drier, people grew wheat and millet. So we're going to talk now about a particular village of China in the Neolithic. Banpo, up here, you can see it's on the Yellow River. It was found in the mid-50s and dates back nearly 6,500 years. So around the same time and level of technological development as Utsi. They were living in houses with wooden frames. You can see in the top left here the holes left by the posts that held the roof up. They made pottery. They had a basic system of writing. And they ceremonially buried their dead. You can see some of them working in the fields. And here's a reconstruction of the village. You know, some people cooking in one of these houses, some people storing grain in a pit. You can see the moat for defence and drainage. And in the top right, you can see that there is a social distinction here being made. That one of these houses is a different design, it's much larger, it has decorative skulls around it. And it's thought that this is the beginning of the idea of a ruler for the people of China. Because once you start having a settled place and stored grain and stored animals, you make yourself a bit of a target for other people. You have something worth stealing, which means you need to have someone who organises you, someone who can organise defence, someone who can organise guard posts, someone who can organise the collection and management of the labour force that produces this food. These rulers go on to be known as emperors in China. They come in dynasties because there are 10 of these dynasties. They're a really handy way of dividing up Chinese history. And we're going to have a look at a couple of these in our course. So usually you have a few rulers from the same family making up one of these dynasties. The logic for why there's 10 dynasties and not one dynasty is Tian Ming, the mandate of heaven. This was an idea that the emperor, the ruler of China, was the son of heaven, that he had been given the right to rule by heaven, and that as long as he performed the right religious rites, kept the gods on side, and was a moral man, things would go well. Heaven would continue to bless him and his children. However, if the ruler was not a just, fair, kind, benevolent man, the gods would begin to warn him and the people of China that things were not right by sending natural disasters or invasions. And the people at that point had the right to overthrow the ruler. There would be a period of chaos, and then a new family, a new ruler would take control and claim the mandate of heaven. And so what we have is this dynastic cycle whereby old families become too entrenched in their position, they face problems, they're challenged by the people, and then a new dynasty comes into power. The way that the ancient Chinese emperors viewed the world was through this idea of Tian Xia, all under heaven. The idea being that the emperor had been given authority of everything in the world, but that his authority varied as you moved geographically away from his palace. And so at the very centre you have those people who are very submissive, who will regularly pay tribute and acknowledge the lordship of the emperor. Then you have an area of that has been pacified where people acknowledge that the emperor is lord, but they're maybe not part of the empire, they're allies or clients. You have a kind of border zone, and then outside that area you have a totally uncivilized, totally chaotic region called the wild zone. And so if you throw a map over China, this is what it ends up kind of looking like. So you can see that the Chinese emperors make claim to a lot of the Asian landmass. And the idea is that the emperor will gradually expand through good policies and through the strength of his army, will expand his control to make more of this area within his domain and under his control. And this shows itself in Chinese maps. And you can see it today in, this is a recent cover from The Economist magazine, how China views itself as the home of civilization, of good manners and culture, and maybe views the rest of the world as chaotic, disordered, and in need of help. And this is kind of borne out by Chinese history. Over time, the area under the control of the Chinese really expands until it includes areas even outside the modern borders of China. And there's a massive Chinese diaspora, including in Australia. So if you want to know more about this, I'd recommend this crash course video, but thank you for listening.